Yeah, the murder, the witchcraft murder, so-called witchcraft murder, I think it's just blown all out of proportion.
People say it might have been somebody that just didn't like him.
It could have been that, but there again, as far as I knew, he had no enemies.
The chap who was murdered, Charles Walton, was a miserable single man, lived in a village. The children I don't say he didn't like children, but children were frightened of him.
And the theory, I think, still is that it was a ritual killing, because there was, in the Cotswold villages, there's a lot of witchcraft going on. Because these villages round here, it's not so much now, obviously, but they're very close societies, very, very close. And when I first heard about it, actually it was long before I used to be with Linda, and because my brother-in-law lived, I don't know whether you know Mickleton.
No.
Yeah, well, that's sort of
It's
next
in
village down, really.
It's just
the next village
literally
down. Well, when I was little, he used to take us out. He lived in Mickleton. He was a farmer, market gardener actually, and he used to take us out and give us trips all round the villages, because we lived in sort of closer to Birmingham. And he used to take us out, and one day we came up here, and he said, this was just after the war actually, so I was only quite little. And he said, there's been a murder here, and no one will talk about it. He said there was a chap, he was pitchforked to the ground, and but he says no one can find out who's done it, and they never did.
Thank you.
Well, I also think it's interesting because people said that he may have been a witch himself, because he had pet frogs.
Yeah.
But the person who killed them might have also been a witch.
Well,
was it like a rivalry?
That's it, yeah. It could have been that. There's all sorts of theories really, but there's a lot do say that. I think the majority sort of all lean towards witchcraft. Yeah, so that's basically the story really. But as I say, there's a few theories about it. But Fabian of Scotland Yard, he did come back. They brought him in because they couldn't find out who'd done it, and then he couldn't find out. He couldn't solve the murder at all, But he did come back for quite a number of years. I think almost up to the point where he died. He came back to this village to try and find out if he could get someone to say something or slip up, but no one ever would. So why people wouldn't talk about it, I don't know. That's another theory, It's
said that they were protecting their own.
Yeah, well, it probably was them, because these villages are very close societies, very, very close.
Yeah, the murder, the witchcraft murder, so-called witchcraft murder, I think it's just blown all out of proportion. The chap who was murdered, Charles Walton, was a miserable single man, lived in a village. The children I don't say he didn't like children, but children were frightened of him. And he worked for a local farmer, and he was, if you go 2 fields up there, he was laying a hedge, what they call laying a hedge, with a thing called a billock, and slashing the hedge, and somebody didn't like him. There were prisoners of war in the local army camp down here, because it was wartime, 1944. There were Italian prisoner of war, and there was rumours that it could have been an Italian prisoner of war who did it to him. But anyway, they never found the chap who did it. And every Valentine's Day, when the murder was committed, a detective used to come back to the village on the day it was committed and go up to the spot where the murder happened, because there were, it was said that the chap who did the murder would return every year to see the spot where he killed Mr. Walton.
I think my first interview with Chris, we'll call him, was one of the most interesting because he was a local. He wasn't born in the village itself, but he was born very nearby, and he grew up with all of these rumors swirling around his head. I also think it's interesting to point out that a lot of places online will tell you that going into the village is a very closed place, that people will sort of drive you off or treat you as a unwelcome newcomer, but this wasn't true at all. A lot of the people that I spoke to were very happy to talk about it.
I'll talk about it, you know, I mean, I don't know why people don't want to talk about it, but years ago, that's what it was like in the village, very close-knit community. People didn't take to strangers. You know, if a stranger came into the village, everybody said, who's that sort of thing, you know.
Meon Hill is a truly fascinating place. It was mentioned by Tacitus, the greatest Roman historian to ever live, as a Celtic hill fort. Few archaeologists have dug here recently, and I was told it's on private land, but whatever its purpose, it's very important in local folklore. One legend says the hill was formed when the devil was watching an abbey being built from nearby. He threw a cloud of earth but missed and formed the hill. Another legend says that a hunter was out on the Sabbath, and an angry god opened up the earth under him and swallowed him whole. Clearly, these legends associate the hill with a darkness not seen in legends around other stones, like Stonehenge or Avebury. Most interestingly, though, are the stories of the black dogs. Black dogs are considered bad omens throughout the British Isles. In East Anglia, where I live, they're called the Black Shuck, and during a storm in 1577, they were said to have killed those praying in two local churches, one in Bungay, associated with Druidry. Abraham Fleming wrote of the encounter, saying, "This black dog, or devil in such a likeness, running all along down the body of the church with great swiftness and incredible haste among the people, in visible form and shape, passed between two persons as they were kneeling, and occupied in prayer as it seemed, wrung the necks of them both in one instant clean backwards, insomuch that even as the moment they kneeled, they strangely died." The legend of these black dogs ties into the hill as well. A local folklore book from the same county describes a report from a man very coincidentally named Charles Walton, who described seeing a spectral dog, to which the village folk mock and tease him. On the 9th sighting, this dog was accompanied by a woman with no head. When he returned, he found his sister had died. We now know this was probably not the same Charles Walton, but even the Chief Inspector Robert Fabian of Scotland Yard seemed to be terrified of these black dogs. He claimed that, on his way up to the murder site, a black dog ran past him with no leash. He flagged down a young boy, thinking it could have been his. When the boy said that he had no dog, the inspector described what he'd just seen. He claimed in his book that the boy's face went pale, and he wordlessly snapped around and ran off.
Very, very close. And, you know, most of the people, till sort of cars came into, you know, in such abundance, you know, people probably didn't ever, you know, go outside their villages. The only trip they ever did was probably to the local livestock markets and things like that, because the village I used to live in, a village called Great Orme, it's over by Ulster, and the old boy opposite, the family opposite me, there were three brothers actually, and he used to tell me that, you know, they never went on holiday or anything like that. And he said their day out was a day at the market, and what they do, they drive the cattle to the market, which could be about, you know, any amount of miles. It could be, I don't know, 10 miles. And he said, he did say to me, he said, if you were lucky, you got a lift back. If you didn't, you had to walk back. You know. So he said, but sometimes he said, I could get a lift on a horse and cart back. You know.
It seems like the detective thought that the village was Fabian.
Yeah, Fabian.
It seems like he thought the village was a backwater place. He painted it as a bunch of witches out here.
In 1944, all this here, I can remember, was all fields like this. These houses weren't here. None of those houses down there were here. The village sort of ended here. Very little village, probably 400 people. That was the local school there.
Oh, the one with the sign on the wall.
Where it says on the wall, there was a saying, if you go and look at it, remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth. That's what it says on the wall. Victorian. And that was the school where the children went to school. My grandparents lived in those thatched cottages just there. My grandfather was the local blacksmith and my grandmother was a school teacher.